All right, what is up, folks? I have to give kudos to Ray here for the rebranded name of the show. You'll have to give the listener some insight into where this came up from. I don't know how in the world I had to like conk myself over the head of how I didn't come up with this name, but we're calling this the kind of like news update kind of report that we give on this weekly basis, the Repertoire report, which I think just lands from an alliteration perspective. It fits in with the branding so well. And so I'm here again with Ray DeLucci. He's kind of co-hosting some of these industry news segments, doing some solo podcasts, and we were even jamming before the mics came on that we're going to start to have you folks come on the show too. And so if something happens to pique your interest, if there is an insight that gets you particularly excited, and you think that there is something from your real world experience that you want to kind of like share with the listeners of this show in kind of a constructive way, or even just kind of like hash something out or spread the news, we would love to have you on. And so I think reaching out over DM on Instagram, I think, is the way that we're doing this first one. But hello@joinrepertoire.com is another email you can use to kind of get in touch and potentially have your voice heard. I did want to give a quick update because the day that this goes out, the following day, I will be on a plane to Copenhagen because I'm going to MAD for their 7th symposium. And so very, very incredibly excited for that. I was stoked to have my application accepted, and I'm going to spend about a week in Copenhagen. If anybody happens to be there and also a listener of the show, please, please, please come say hi. I'd love to take a picture, chop it up about whatever it is that you're getting interest from the conference. The theme this year is Built to Last. And so they're having a bunch of talks and exhibitions and speakers discussing this topic of like sustainability, talking about the business side. And so I have an overly ambitious goal to like shoot a vlog while I'm there and then come back and basically do what it's like to go to MAD, because it is this kind of like invite only symposium and not everybody gets to go. Not everybody can take the time to go. It's quite an expensive endeavor to kind of go to Copenhagen for such a long time. Not to mention the conference ticket costs something like $800 when you kind of do the currency exchange. And so there is a little bit of like, I want to bring as much of that information and the learnings that I have to you folks. We will upload that if it does end up getting made. But even if it doesn't, Ray and I have committed to doing like a recap episode, or at least a section of the Repertoire report where Ray might ask me some questions or see some things that I posted on my story, and we can kind of go from there. But maybe to start off, Ray, how are you?
I'm doing good. It's good to have you back on the show. It was a little lonely last week talking to the ether. Yeah, no, it was good. Yeah, I'm doing well. I had a good weekend. The garden is in. Watching that bloom out has been really cool. Went to an artisan market. Had like a loaf of Parmesan focaccia to myself. It's just a chill
Heck
weekend.
yeah.
So
That's great. That's great.
yeah.
So for those that are maybe finding this as their first episode of this new kind of format of show, I bring a couple stories, Ray brings a couple stories, and we sometimes surprise each other with the things that we find, but then we also just kind of get some additional takeaways from some of these news stories that are percolating in the restaurant, chef, fine dining, casual dining, food R&D space. And so the first one, which is not really a story, it's kind of almost like a piggyback off of the last one that we did together. Did you see this? That Philly and Boston Michelin guide.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not, tooting my own horn again, but I just wanted to kind of give this update because this is moving way faster than I could have probably predicted, but it does seem like a change in the general posture that Michelin is taking. And so there is this kind of Northeast attention that they're kind of bringing.
Yeah.
New York and Chicago, from what I was reading, both are going to get announced at the same time. But it is this, they're calling it a Northeast ceremony, which includes announcements for New York, Chicago, and DC. In the full 2025 restaurant selections will be revealed at a later date, likely in the fall. And so it's just really interesting to see more cities, more areas just potentially getting this access. And then it is the Philly Tourism Board. Philadelphia Convention and Visitors Bureau is responsible for Michelin coming to town. And so that's just an update on this kind of like trending thing that I've been noticing, that the entire US is going to be able to get stars. And I think that's like, again, it's awesome.
Yeah, it's like pretty wild how fast they're moving. I really wonder over the next, couple of years how diners are going to accept it. And then you kind of mentioned this last time about the idea that they go in and it's not like you just automatically get 3-star restaurants. So I'm really interested to see how how the ratings evolve and like what the standards are and like how they implement them. Because I was thinking about that. It's like, if you're comparing everything to a base model of like French fine dining and whatnot, then obviously they've had diversity in what they're doing, but like America's so diverse in its food offerings from region to region. It's like it seems as though there needs to be some revisiting of what they consider three Michelin compared to where they're at in the country. Not lesser or more, but just different. So I don't know. Have you thought about that at all? Like,
Yeah,
how are they going to look at things differently?
you're actually foreshadowing a story I'm going to cover later, and so I'll kind of tie that back in when it's time for me to bring that data point up. But that was the quick update that I wanted to give. The first actual story that we can dig into. Have you seen the new Airbnb refresh that they launched?
Personal chef.
Yeah, pretty much, kind of.
Yep.
Not
Yep.
exactly, but sort of. For those that didn't catch it, Airbnb did like a big unveiling of new design stuff. Their icons that they have in the app basically went viral on Twitter because it is this like return to almost maximalism from a design perspective. I think even I'm looking at the recording software we're using right now. It's these like very single line, icons that people are using. And Airbnb came and dropped this thing where there's 3 new tabs basically at the top of the app when you come in. It's something like homes, and then there's experiences, and you actually have this ability to book more than just a place to stay on Airbnb going forward. And the thing that I wanted to tie in here is for those that remember earlier episodes of the podcast when I was doing pop-ups, a strategy that I had way back in the day was to approach Airbnb hosts and say, hey, you happen to have a really phenomenal kitchen. It has this really cool counter and it can seat 8 people. Is there a world where I could potentially host a pop-up out of your space on a night when it might not be that busy? Because I was a struggling pop-up host, basically, and I didn't want to pay the exorbitant fees that some event venues would ask for, or even restaurants that were closed. When totally understandably, they have to worry about this commercial rent that they have to pay. And if they're closed and they want to have somebody come in and, chances are a lot of the people probably don't take as good of care of it as me and my team did. And so you got to kind of budget for those sorts of things. And so it was a really cost-effective way for me to go in and use Airbnbs in this kind of like sharing economy to actually come out ahead in my private chef business. But now it seems, I'm not saying that they discovered that and then they decided to rope that into their business model. It is more, you can actually layer things on top of, I want to stay in an Airbnb in San Diego and I want to hire a private chef, or I want to have catering because I have a wedding that I'm hosting, and me and the family actually decided to rent this big Airbnb, and we need additional services on top of it. And so I'm saying that in the context of, if you can have some sort of a first mover advantage anytime, and I know that Experiences has been available on Airbnb for a little while, but with this app refresh, I can imagine, the companies wanting to pour more resources into it. They're wanting to make sure that the experiences that they're highlighting are of high quality. And so if this could be a potential like new way to get leads for your business, whether you're a private chef or you bake stuff or, you do stuff in home for people and you want to maybe get more clients, I just kind of wanted to bring it up on the show because I know that a lot of listeners maybe have that restaurant experience and then now they want to work for themselves in some capacity. And in those early days, it is hard to get your foot in the door. But if you can use a company that already has users, i.e. an Airbnb, and the attention's already there, and they have kind of put their hand up and said, I'm willing to pay money to stay in XYZ place, and you happen to be in a city that has a high concentration of those places, you can really take advantage of it. And so it was just an interesting insight that I wanted to bring to this audience.
Yeah, it's funny. I anecdotally have told a couple of people about this in the industry, and the first reaction is always pulling out their phone to bookmark it or go back to it later. I agree with you on the first mover advantage. The Airbnb private chef thing specifically, if you're in an area with high demand for events or catering or anything like that, being a first mover on this could likely transform your business if you become highly rated versus everyone else on the platform. That's just how these things work. It's how they operate. So I guess like a PSA, like if you are interested in a private chef business or trying to grow that on the side, this is probably a great time. If you are allowed on Airbnb. I did check it out. There is a little bit of a process to get on it. I guess they review basically your posting and see if your quality for what they want. But I'm interested to see what like the rate of acceptance is on that. But yeah, I think it's going to be really big for people, especially those like you said that are going to be first mover.
And just to be clear, I think that this can be. I used it in the context of you can get more leads for your business. I think that anybody, we saw this happen with TikTok on the social media side when people for people who cook on the internet, they got the first mover advantage on TikTok. They pushed all their chips in. They were able to grow really fast. And then you get rug pulled, right? Like a platform either increases their fees, decreases your reach, gets banned by the government. There's all sorts of risks that come with, putting your eggs in one proverbial basket. And so that's the other cautionary side of this, and hopefully the lesson that you can take away if this is something you're going to try to leverage is that you can use it, abuse it basically, and make sure that you're building off of these sorts of things. You're keeping a client list that is your own, whether it's an email list or a Rolodex of phone numbers or something that you can use if and when something happens, people realize there's an arbitrage and all of a sudden there's a ton of competition now, or even like a silly risk, right? Like I think a lot of these companies, Yelp is maybe another example where one bad review can ultimately really like slam you. And even hearing that there's a pretty stringent application process makes it even harder to potentially do this. But it was something where I was like, man, if I was doing it all over again and I was in that season, I think I would probably lean into that a little bit harder, just to make it so that I could maybe have a little bit of additional income, or maybe even in the days when I knew that I was just wanting to get a different range of experiences. So I was doing tasting menu stuff, and then I also did a small handful of weddings. Or maybe that's the time when you want to like have your photographer friend come in and photo shoot the thing, and then you can use that for marketing across all of the other events that you do. And that might have only been possible for you to do something like maybe you're only doing 10-person stuff, but you can get hired for a 40-person thing through Airbnb. I just think it's an interesting opportunity.
Yeah, I was playing around with it. It does seem that there could be some work on pricing, because it's kind of like certain boxes they put your pricing model in, which I could see being difficult to translate out if you're a private shop with different offerings. But yeah, I'm interested to see the effects on it. And if anyone's accepted and is using it, would love to have you on the show and talk about it, because I think that'd be a great learning experience. So.
What do you got?
I'll start out with bad news. So, as promised, been watching the National Restaurant Association April Restaurant Performance Index has not come in, but what did come in on their research tab was this report on elevated costs continue to pressure restaurant profitability. So total restaurant input costs soared 30% since before the pandemic. So they go on to say that prior to the pandemic, the cost breakdown for a typical independent restaurant looked like this. Food and labor costs were the two most significant line items, each accounting for approximately 33 cents of every dollar in sales, which is pretty normal. Other expenses such as utilities, occupancy, etc. combined to represent about 29% of sales. That left a pre-tax profit margin of 5% for a typical restaurant. So based on government data and surveys of restaurant operators, the National Restaurant Association estimates that input costs posted double-digit percentage increases across all major categories since 2019, led by 35% gains in both food and labor costs. So then they have these really great charts, which we'll leave the page in the show notes. And I really think anyone who operates a restaurant or is looking to get into a restaurant really pay attention to this, because this is crucial. And it could be a good benchmark on where you should be pricing wise. So for many restaurants, customer traffic is still dampened compared to pre-pandemic levels. So to cover the higher input costs, the average restaurant would need to increase prices by 23.8% to break even on the costs that are happening right now. And so in order to increase prices to maintain a 5% profit margin, they would need to increase prices more than 30% to maintain that 5% margin. So if you had a restaurant before COVID, before even the pandemic to now, if you have not increased your prices by 30%, you are not maintaining a 5% profit margin on restaurants or on your restaurants. Pretty stunning stuff. I mean, obviously it makes sense. Costs have been insane, and this it's not just a tariff thing. That impacts it, but this is like just over the last 5 years, everything that's been thrown at restaurants. Again, costs go up, but price increases are so drastic, and 30% is a lot. 23% is a lot. So, your thoughts on the restaurant report by the National Restaurant Association?
Yeah, it all catches up, right? Like the numbers need that wiggle room. Something's got to give. We kind of touched on this the 2 episodes ago, but I do think that it is something like we're monitoring it. We're continuing to bring it to people's attention, because it is something that it is a little bit of a boiling the frog effect if you're not paying attention enough. And then all of a sudden it's like just slow enough. Like it is just, minuscule enough, or maybe it's like, oh, that's not that much. And you just kind of shrug it off. But then you look back over the months, over the quarters, over the years, and you get to this place where you're like, oh man, like we're really underwater here. I guess it does surprise me to hear some of those numbers, like maybe not be as high as I like. The numbers ultimately hash out. I just think maybe how they're bucketing things isn't maybe how I would traditionally bucket it.
Yeah.
But still, the numbers are the numbers. And again, you're making me switch my orders to maybe go into my next story that was kind of in line with talking about what we're talking both on the ethnic food on Michelin side, and then now
Yeah.
these rising costs. Did you have anything other notes to add on the NRA?
I think aside from that, what's cool is they share that so basically there's a new website that spotlights restaurant jobs and career paths called Restaurants Works. It's an interactive resource offering data-driven insights on occupational options, possible career paths, and industry trends, both nationally and for specific regions. So I just thought it was maybe a good positive that if you are looking for a resource on finding work, or what the impact of your career path is, Restaurant Works. I'll share that as well. But very interesting stuff.
Yeah, nice. I popped a chart up on screen here,
Okay.
and we can link this in the show notes as well. I think the name of the research company that came up with this is hilarious. It's called Mordor Intelligence. So we've got Sauron in the restaurant industry apparently. And they came up with this. I'm not familiar with these folks. I haven't really, to be honest, gone through all of the individual specifics, but this chart was fascinating to me, in line with what you were talking about. So this is average order value at full service restaurants in the United States from 2017, and then they extrapolated out to 2030. And so you can see we're in 2025, and I would say that this is pretty accurate. Like in 2020, pre-pandemic, my wife and I going out to eat, and it's $70 for the two of us at, again, full service restaurant. That's not all that outside of the ordinary. Now it is $47.23 just 5 years later for that same average order value. And then what they're extrapolating, and this kind of lines up with the numbers you're talking about, 30% up, and we get to 2030 and the average order is $65.53 if this trend continues, which is fascinating for me to see. They talked about, popular dishes like burritos, salmon and tuna rolls, edamame. Other popular dishes are rice, salads, and poke bowls. And so they kind of do this. It's a little bit difficult with some of these data sets because they do quick service stuff, and then they do what they call full service restaurants, and they do some franchises in here. But there was a bunch of really interesting data points that I wanted to kind of cover here. The first one, and this is maybe the counterpoint, my optimism and I'm not saying you're a pessimist, Ray, but I do think that there is negative news, but then there's also some countervailing, potentially positive news, which is the entire market size of full service restaurants is going to almost double by 2030. And so we're compounding at an 11.33% compound annual growth rate. And so the space is growing. And that's not bad. I think that the other interesting finding here was that full service restaurants are still kind of like keeping their market share, from the sense of almost 30, a third of all restaurants, quick service restaurants is almost half. But full service restaurants, these small independent places, are still like a big chunky part of it. Which I think we've talked about consolidation in previous shows where, certain places are closing. But at the same time, I went on Eater today because my wife was asking about a place for lunch for us today. And I was like, oh man, there's so many places that I haven't heard of that are just have open around me. Yeah. And so I think you kind of have both things happening, and that shows in the charts here as well. We had this sharp drop off in 2020, but almost every single year after that, the number has either stayed flat or it's effectively kind of grown year over year over year. And so that's really exciting to hear that more restaurants are ultimately opening. There's more demand for these sorts of things. And the other one that was kind of interesting to kind of talk about was the share of ethnic food in the market, just kind of overall. And what I think is kind of interesting is they kind of lump North American in one cuisine, quote unquote, which again, Mordor research maybe needs to be a little bit more nuanced than this. But again, we will link this full report if folks want to kind of read this. But they go into a bunch of different, kind of like data points and break down the data with their own quantitative analysis here, talking about like, is the market overly consolidated right now, or is the market overly fragmented right now? And you can just kind of see some more insights here. Any thoughts on both rising order values? I mean, this was the chart that I really wanted to show, because from 2020 to 2030, it is an almost doubling of, and that's just the what is that? The eighth wonder of the world is compounding that we don't understand. Our brains have a really hard time wrapping our heads around this. Yeah. But this is compounding like crazy. And so I'm kind of curious your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think, can you scroll back down to that, what was the segmented? I think that was interesting a little bit more.
Yes.
Where did that go? There's like a bar.
This one?
That one. Well, that's very interesting to me.
Yeah.
So, like obviously the United States full service restaurant market highly competitive. You would almost think that like with all the large corporations and whatnot, that it would like that these businesses are being squeezed out, which in some cases they are. But it's also is like the competitiveness of the market is that something that's going to change as more prices rise or as order value rise, as costs go up, and as the average consumer doesn't want to spend as much, will this bar change? And I would wonder if Mordor, if they were to like guess in 2030 what this bar looks like, because
Oh,
it's in the
interesting.
fragmented section, will this be more consolidated due to larger companies being able to absorb more of the economic headwinds that they're going to face? So that would be my biggest thing. I mean, I'm not surprised by the order value. It's not. It's kind of astonishing how quick it's going to go up, especially from 2029 to 2030 is a giant jump. Um, but yeah, I would wonder what that bar would be like in terms of diversity of business in the restaurant industry, and what's consolidated and what's segmented, and if it's any different or if it's way more consolidated.
Well, what hopefully this allows folks to see is that you do the math on whatever an average order might look like at your restaurant, your check average, however you decide to label it or do the math. And you start to look at this and you say, okay, well, if 50% of restaurants are maybe quick service, or maybe there is a little bit of like, you can see more robust data from a Bloomin' Group or a Darden or a Cheesecake Factory type of organization, and you're saying, okay, well, I'm scared to make sure to kind of put my foot in the ground and say my check average is $50, but then you look and you're like, oh, well, the average or across the industry is looking like it's going to be like that in 2026. And so
Yeah.
maybe that takes a little bit of the sting off of, again, I think you and I have discussed this, Ray. Prices need to come up, but people don't for fear of what are people going to think of me? It's other people's opinions that they're nervous about, even though the math is telling them one thing. It's almost like this like gut intuition instinct that's maybe driving them in a different direction. And a solve for that might just be just sentiment across the entire industry saying, hey, this is what things cost now. And we just kind of got to get used to that.
One point, this is something I brought up on the solo episode last week. The idea, new data come out that grocery prices falling drastically in certain respects, but comparing that to the rising menu prices over the last few months in restaurants really leaves vulnerable going out to eat in the modern day consumer if they see a big price increase. So that would be my only other like point is it's really tricky right now.
Another
So
just really quickie point before I hand it over to you for your next one. In the research that I was doing, I found a shocking statistic. How much money do you think Chef's Warehouse makes a year?
I mean, I know it's in the millions, but I wouldn't even have a guess, to be honest.
The headline is Chef's Warehouse increased their sales 8.7% in Q1. Just Q1, 950 million. And so the company projects a full year net sales of $4 billion this year.
And the
So
restaurant
Chef's
business is
Warehouse,
hurting.
dude, it's wild.
That's crazy.
That's wild. Not a company I would have thought was a multi-billion-dollar a year company. And listen, similar to other businesses that we're talking about, maybe single-digit profit margins on that, but still in the billions, that's a lot.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy.
What do you got?
I was not expecting. I was expecting millions, but like you would think with everything going on with the restaurants, it wouldn't be that. But hey, let's talk about our shared alma mater, the Culinary Institute of America. Just a broader theme. They had two big investment news recently. First up is a one and only resort will be built next to the Culinary Institute of America. So Kerzner International and resort developer Nolan Reynolds International are partnering with the CIA to bring a one and only resort to New York's Hudson Valley. Property expected to open in 2028 will sit on 21 acres adjacent to the Culinary Institute of America's campus in Hyde Park, New York. The resort will have 61 cabins, guest rooms, and suites, plus branded residences. This will offer exclusive culinary programming through its partnership with the Culinary Institute of America, complemented by wellness offerings and an on-property longevity hub by Clinique La Prairie. The Hudson Valley property will join one and only portfolio of 14 resorts and will be the brand's second U.S. property. And then, in other big news, PR Newswire, Culinary Institute of America, Thymus, and Alamance Foods team up for groundbreaking research study. And so this was reported on May 15th that the CIA has announced a new collaboration with Thymus, a company that aims to demystify the complexities of the human experience by understanding the emotions and experiences people have in association with the foods they eat. A grant by All Man's Foods was shared, and basically what this was sharing is that in Provost Erickson, who was at the CIA, says we are truly excited to explore this new arena for research in the fields of food and beverage and hospitality education. It can be easy to overlook the importance of genuine hospitality, eye contact, warmth, and a feeling that until now could not be quantified. This research will be used to develop curricula for CIA's Hospitality Academy training program, which is designed to empower future hospitality leaders to create positive connections with their guests and positive outcomes for their business. And basically, this is the idea. This idea is an idea of product development that is really focused on the human experience, especially when people are using cell phones and digital technology. But that being said, it's just interesting the continued development the CIA has going on. Just initial thoughts on these two partnerships on your end regarding the CIA.
I love this idea only because of a couple like multi-layering factors that are just all coming together. So one is this idea of like escaping outside of the metropolis, basically.
Yeah.
And, you know, similar to what we talked about a couple episodes back with like Yountville being such a, you know, interesting place for a chef to open a thing because it was just close enough to San Francisco where you could kind of like quote unquote escape for the weekend and go. I saw a thing on X this morning talking about like, why don't more people move to upstate New York? Because it has all of these lower cost of living benefits. It has all four seasons. It's a little bit of a slower pace, quote unquote.
I have some reasons why I moved out. I do have some reasons why I moved out. So
yeah. And so
answer that on a different podcast. But.
Yeah. I mean, it's a one man's trash is another man's treasure type of story. But I do think that also might be an attractive thing where it's like, hey, let's get away. Let's go and visit. I liked living in Poughkeepsie. I didn't think it was, but again, to your point, I didn't want to stay there. You know what I mean? I had some job offers coming off of CIA to stay in Poughkeepsie, and I was like, heck no. And the other thing is, to your point on the putting your devices away, having this kind of like full suite hospitality experience, there was I don't think I'm revealing anything by sharing this, but a friend of mine had an investor approach her to open on one of the islands out here, right just off of Seattle, something very similar to that. So like lodges, spas, fine dining restaurant, retreats, you know what I mean? Be able to host events out there. And it was this idea of like being a full service. You can come and escape here. We will pamper you. And I think the interesting pairing is with like CIA as a partner in this, because it is an interesting, like, you got to staff these places and you got to have people to run the place. Basically, is getting your first job coming off of CIA to be placed at a place like this. Are you reading that as the same thing? Like that's how they're gonna kind of do this, where you have the opportunity? Because when I was in Napa last month, there's a place in Napa called the Oxbow Market, and right next to the Oxbow is like this beautiful campus where there's like a theater. I didn't get a chance to go inside, but there's a restaurant on the ground floor, and I was like, oh, interesting. And I was talking to my wife, and I was like, it would have been so cool to be able to have the opportunity to kind of like come work here. I looked inside the restaurant, and it was like maybe a Thursday night, and there weren't that many people in the dining room, which I think you run the risk of when we had the restaurants on campus. It was almost like between the students touring and, the people who lived nearby and they just want to go get lunch somewhere, it was pretty reliable for us to know that people were going to come. I think that's the one risk you run, is if you build this place, you spend a bunch of money investing into it, and it's kind of like, who's marketing the people to kind of come to a place like this?
Yeah.
And then is that something that maybe takes away from the type of person you want to come and spend money on this? Oh, it's just a bunch of students running the place. And again, not saying students are bad. I just think that it is something where you kind of have to manage the quality of service you're getting if you have somebody who's relatively inexperienced, maybe in a role. And so maybe they do something where I know that CIA is doing things like master's programs. And so maybe there's something where only certain students of a certain level of experience have the ability to work in a place like this.
Yeah.
But I don't know, where did your head go?
My first reaction, and I'm going to be going in the fall to give a speech to the students regarding like my career path and how I went away from restaurants and did something different. I think my first thought was, A, it's a lot of investment, but B, it's like, I really need to do a deep dive and speak to someone at the school. What is continuing to drive the investment, and what is continuing to drive the student um, admissions, I guess, because I don't say that in a negative way, but we just went over the data on restaurants and everything else. And I know the new president of the CIA, I think his background was from Google. And it seems like they're making a lot of these decisions that aren't necessarily restaurant focused. Like this is like property management and research and development into different product development. And I would just wonder what the next evolution of the college is, because I think that there are a lot of gaps and there are a lot of questions if you're going to CIA to be a restaurant owner. What is the return on investment for that now, with the costs of going to school, the risks of opening a restaurant? So I think that it's very interesting for me to watch the CIA evolve, because they are the world's biggest culinary college and they are the most esteemed culinary college in the world. And so a lot of people go there. And I think, there's a lot of people that trash on it, or there's a lot of people that say it's overpriced. And, some people have good reason to say that. And I would agree. But I would also say that, like, if the cost that they charge is being turned into something where you're really getting into stuff like this, food development, property management, all of that within the hospitality industry, I think that is a much more that's a much better value proposition to a person exiting high school and going there. So I'm very excited to see where this goes, and just very interested overall what the core philosophy is going to be for the CIA over the next 5 years, and how they respond to the different issues and challenges that face chefs and restaurateurs from an economic perspective. So that's where my mind went. I think it's great that there's always going to be investment and there's new opportunities for students, but for me, it's like interesting to see what they're choosing to invest in that's outside of just a traditional restaurant. Because they could have just as easily partnered with a restaurant group and built a luxury restaurant there and had another opportunity for students to do something there, but instead they're focusing on this like layered, more dynamic approach to hospitality as a whole, and what that means to be an owner in that space and not just a part of it. So I think that's a very interesting tell on where the college is going.
Is CIA still technically a nonprofit as far as you're aware?
That I'm not sure of.
Okay. At least for either a season or maybe even currently, and I can maybe just look this up here, is CIA Culinary a nonprofit? Is an independent not-for-profit college. And so they still have that on the landing page. And I think that does pose a little bit of this. I'm not trying to put my total conspiracy hat on here, but it is this interesting thing where maybe it is particularly really profitable. And so I think that creates an interesting dilemma where you have these tuitions and they're bringing in more than they're spending. If you look at some of the compensation of some of the staff members, are like, you can just search them and see like what the president of the CIA is making right now. And so if you are taking in more,
yeah, I've done that search before.
Yeah. And so it's like, how in the world do you ultimately decide to use this capital? And I think it does create this interesting dilemma in higher education, where it is this thing that we take out loans for, and you see it's this big investment into your future. And you kind of theoretically think that the price has to continue to go up. It's not like they can bring prices down if they cut their costs. If their costs come down, they keep the price the same or even raise it a little bit.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not trying to keep my conspiracy hat on here, but it does turn into this dilemma where, what happens if they were to slash the price of tuition? Then alumni like you and me are going to come back and say, hey, WTF, like where's my discount? Can I get a credit back for these tens of thousands of dollars that, other people in the future are not having to pay, but I had to pay?
Yeah.
And then, to your point, is it a situation of, were there better places to invest this? Or is it a situation where, like, what if this fails? You know what I mean? Like, what if this totally face plants and nobody ends up coming, and it was just a poor use of capital? And then they just throw up their hands and say, okay, well, maybe there's a little bit of like, we're going to write this off in some way, shape, or form. I don't know. I just think it's an interesting, like, seeing the way that some of these large educational institutions use additional resources is, again, it's like tying it back in. I guess I can kind of see where it ties back into the education and maybe placing students. And to be honest, being able to see a business that is a little bit more complex than, I mean, maybe another way to say it is, I don't know if I took a ton of business knowledge away from working at Katerina on campus in the same way that I would being in a place that is like, there's lodging that's associated here. There's experiences that, add another facet to the revenue model that could be maybe a little bit more interesting for students that are maybe a little bit more business minded.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I wonder. I really am waiting for them to like and maybe that what we were talking about, that investment in the product development, but it would be really cool if the CIA really focused on like a food manufacturing uh, development center slash course, because that is a huge industry that I feel like they're really lacking in showcasing. But obviously, I'm biased, so yeah, that's all I had for that one. What is your next story?
So, friend of the show, Chef John Merrick, he is in Chicago now for the NRA conference, and he called me yesterday. He was telling me about how Charlie Trotter's is reopening. Did you know this was happening?
I think I heard some news on it actually. Yes,
So,
I didn't
Dylan
look
Trotter,
into it, but I was like, it was like it did pique my interest. But go
yeah,
ahead.
I mean, it's this funny thing where Dylan Trotter, who's Charlie's son, is spearheading the effort. They're doing a 2-week tribute dinner series, or it might have already happened, in collaboration with Chef Grant Achatz from Next. And it's
Yeah, yeah.
it's
Okay.
in Lincoln Park, and the restaurant
Yep.
is known for its custom stoves. It's going to reopen later this year. And I just think that it was closed in 2012, which was kind of like right
Mm-hmm.
as it was right when I graduated culinary school, actually, is when it closed. And I just think it's such an interesting like combination of time heals all wounds, and then it's also like this return to reopening interesting restaurants or places that had their heyday, and now they're just kind of like either washed up or they completely shut down, or the chef either passed or moved on, or something ultimately ended up happening. Because for those that don't remember, Charlie Trotter was kind of a savage. Like, he really set the culture of fine dining in Chicago into be this place of like ruthlessness, and you work like crazy, and we're going to be quite mean and pretty unhealthy
Well,
from a
if you've seen Grant's Chef's Table, he even
yes.
documents how pretty
Same
like
with
brutal it was. And wasn't that with the
Curtis Duffy as well.
Curtis
Yeah.
Duffy? Yeah,
Yeah, Curtis
yeah,
Duffy as well. He would tell stories about working at Charlie Trotter's. He took a lot of that, like, I don't really use the word trauma in a, like that way all that often, but like there is stuff that kind of carries and still has a halo, almost like an afterglow in Chicago with the chefs, and the way that I always tell people, like, my time in Chicago felt very different than it did in any other kind of city that I ended up working in, both in
yeah.
the US and abroad. And so it was just interesting for me to see that, like, one, there is someone who's wanting to spearhead this revitalization, and it's staying in the family and all those sorts of things. But at the same time, the chef's response was also really interesting, where I think that there's this like paying respects to Chef Trotter and saying, like, yes, look for the positive. In other words, I can see him as being someone who, like, the industry would have quote unquote canceled and said, no, let's not, do you know what I mean? Kind of like give this person's name any sort of like additional notoriety. But it's almost
Yep.
like, and again, that's where my optimism brain comes in, of like, we can take this and still continue to build on it. We can take this and make it into something amazing, make it to still provide really high quality experiences in this place. And so it is this very collaborative project. They have a bunch of people's hands on it. And I just think that it's an interesting insight into something that was a negative, and it's kind of being spun into a positive, which again, we'll have to see how it plays out, but I'm kind of a fan. And I'm more interested to see, is there a world where maybe other really cool restaurants that, again, have this, they rhyme with Charlie Trotter's. I'm thinking of
Mm-hmm.
like the Quilted Giraffe in New York, which again, I'm so angry that I never had the opportunity to eat there when it
Mm-hmm.
again was in its heyday. Is there a world where somebody comes along and says, maybe this is a trend? We start to see some of these, like older places that have quote unquote IP, brand, name recognition. And it's kind of like, hey, we can come in and ultimately spin these up again.
Yeah, it's been interesting with what Next does. They had the Bobby Flay menu, which actually looked really interesting. Now that he's compared to Charlie Trotter at all, but just this idea of like the last generation of restaurants and what they meant, the '90s into the early 2000s. I think it's interesting to say the least. I almost wonder though, like, it's very Chicago specific, right? Like Trotters is very Chicago specific. So does this type of revitalization happen for restaurants in different cities that were like once staples there? Like, there's a ton of restaurants in Buffalo that have closed that, if they opened, if I was in town, I would pay money to go. Like the C Bar was a perfect example. It was a restaurant that was in Buffalo for quite some time, and the chef Mike, he was a staple of chefs in the Buffalo food scene. And C Bar closed years ago, and I believe he had a coming back dinner, and I'm pretty sure it did well. And just this idea of revitalizing old brands or old restaurants that, for one reason or the other, had to go away, and bringing them back, I think is does pay homage to the idea of what that restaurant stood for. And, obviously with Trotters, like it was a culture that I wouldn't promote or I wouldn't share, but there obviously were a lot of people beyond Charlie Trotter that put a lot of work and effort into making experiences for people. So maybe it's an homage to them and what they worked for and what they went through. But at the same time, this idea of just remembering where food was and what food was like, especially in a TikTok virality, quick media era, to be able to preserve, especially the last 2 decades of food, I think is important because such drastic shifts have come into play. And I mean, sometimes you tell people now, you talk about El Bulli and they don't know what it is. Or you talk about, name any number of restaurants that were big when we went to college and people are already lost on it because there's just so much saturated in the market now. So, and I know anyone listening who thinks it's crazy that someone doesn't know who El Bulli is. I've talked to many chefs in the last 5 years, especially younger than me, which is not much if you're in the industry and they don't know what it is. So
I had that as an original podcast or motivation to start the podcast. I was standing at the class, and one of the apprentices at the restaurant, I was bringing up an insight on a headline on Noma had dropped. This was maybe back in 2015 or 2016. And the apprentice looked at me and he was like, "What's Noma?" And I was like, "Dude, you live in Scandinavia. You work in a fine dining kitchen and you don't know Rene Redzepi. You don't know where Noma is." And I looked at that and I was kind of I had that first reaction. And then my secondary reaction was is there a world where I can do something about this and have it be in a format where people can listen to some of this stuff on the way to work? So shout out if you're listening to us on the way to work right now. But just really quick, I wanted to touch on some, I'm going to pardon the pun, but it's the ingredients of this revitalization that I think is really important. So the first one is Quilted Giraffe in New York and Charlie Trotters, quote unquote, in Chicago, I think might be two different things. Because correct me if I'm wrong, you went to work at Charlie Trotter's restaurant, Trotters, so that you could work under the guy. And the guy is not there anymore, kind of by definition. Yes, his son is kind of taking the role, which might be the next kind of ingredient, quote unquote. The family is still kind of involved. I think if you listen to J.R.R. Tolkien and Christopher Tolkien, his son, getting involved in some of the later years of his publication after his dad passed, there's a really interesting kind of lineage on him actually having the say in what happened with his dad's IP, quote unquote, with his Middle Earth writings.
One step crazier is Frank Herbert and his son, I'm blanking on his name for the Dune books. He went on to write, and unfortunately, a large part of his audience didn't like his work.
Yes.
But same idea.
And so I think that it's who's making the call here, because you have this person's name, and are they going to run it into the ground? Are they going to totally bastardize it? Is there a world where they just take it and find amazing success? And who does that upside kind of go to if you're making money off of somebody else's name? And so I think it's all these the same thing with the location. Are they going to revitalize things? Who's going to be the chef de cuisine? Who's going to want to be chef de cuisine of the new Trotters? Is it going to be this? Maybe they keep it this platform where collaborations continually happen, and it's just kind of this blank canvas, and people can come in, and the kitchen is still beautiful, and the dining room is still beautiful, but people just come in and do their thing in the legacy of fine dining and hospitality. I just think it's so interesting how you change one of these variables and all of a sudden the incentives are misaligned, or you have bad actors coming in and doing nefarious things, and then it turns into a cautionary tale, right? So my optimism's there, but I do think that you have to kind of look at all of the pieces and make sure that this is done in a way where Chef Trotter would be proud, or Chicago can look at this place as okay, now I am actually considering, do I go to Alinea or do I go to Trotters again? It is this kind of there's a new competitor in the arena. It's just an interesting thing that I'm keeping my eyes on.
Yeah, definitely.
What do you got?
I got one more story, and then I got kind of a call to action that's timely with everything going on right now. I kind of wanted to end myself on that. But first off is this last story. So I get a food business news. It's a publication I get. It's monthly or bi-weekly. It's free. You just sign up, and really insightful stuff. There's a story in this magazine I get. There's a story on Food Dive, but basically this story is PepsiCo to accelerate transition from artificial ingredients. Food Dive sharing that ADM, the company ADM, it's a flavoring company. They're working on new flavoring that is pushing away from the banned ingredients, or what could be proposed banned ingredients from the administration currently. And so I just thought it was maybe just a quick pointing out that major companies are taking the idea of these artificial sweeteners or stuff that is perceived as bad seriously. The food development world is taking this very seriously, obviously, because if it gets written into law, then you can't use it. But more so, there is a push right now to a more healthier alternative in these flavorings for large-scale brands. So just a PSA that this stuff is being taken seriously by bigger brands. And as you know, I think it's really important that if you're an independent restaurant owner or someone in the food industry, if big brands are spending millions of dollars of research and marketing to take these actions into account, then you should just focus on it as well. So just a thought. If you're using if you have a menu that is using some stuff that isn't great or has some stuff, not saying to wipe it all away, but it could actually be a really big marketing pivot if you decide to share that you're using sources of food that are more healthy or not using as many artificial dyes or whatever that might be. And I know for a lot of restaurants, like you cook fresh, so that doesn't even matter, but could be a source of marketing. Or even if you don't use any of this, you be hey, like no artificial dyes used. We use fresh ingredients. We're on this push, but it's a big deal. And I think we're going to see a lot more of this in the coming year or so. So just your thoughts on the idea that big food is moving away from a lot of these due to the government pressure they're seeing.
Well, I thought, what if a guest comes in and asks, hey, I want a soda that has not any XYZ things included in it.
Yeah.
And just to prep not just the owners, but like staff to start getting those questions.
Yeah.
Like, I know that when I really started to take my health a little bit more seriously, it all of a sudden became a question on how much protein is in this thing. And I'm starting to read the nutrition, web pages of certain restaurants that you go eat at. And it is this funny thing. I know that the total extrapolated version of this is the Portlandia skit where like, where did the chicken come from? But it does that, those conversations becoming a part of the zeitgeist. It's like the conversations are still there. It's like, what are we talking about might particularly change on an individual basis. And so people being aware that customers are worrying about this, I sometimes think about Costco and the level of awareness they have to what is trending on TikTok so that the thing on their shelf says the right thing on the label, so that the person who is influencing people to go buy specific things, make sure that they make it known that their product either has or does not have, or how much it has on XYZ ingredient. And again, that awareness might be the difference between, again, them coming to you and being super happy and you being able to have that business and bask in those profits, or them saying, well, I'm not really sure, or, oh, these guys haven't kept up with the times, and so I'm going to go with somebody else.
Yep. We got to do a podcast on. I wanted to do a on TikTok a tasting of the Kirkland beer. Have you seen this?
No, I haven't.
This like award-winning brewery is behind the new Costco beer, like or the new ale, which
super cool.
I guess the original ale went viral for being terrible, but this one apparently is like made by award-winning producers. So. It's very interesting.
I mean, they have the buying power to do it. For those that don't know, Costco, I think, is like the number one wine buyer in the U.S. Like, they buy so much wine. They have so much. They can throw their weight around when it comes to pricing and availability and where the wine gets stocked just nationwide. And this is coming from the guy who lives like 4 miles from Costco location 0001 or whatever it is. The original wall is still up in the Costco. So I have one more story.
Just a quick fun fact. I hadn't been in a Costco ever until this year, about 2 months ago. So,
wow.
I was always a Sam's Club guy growing up. We didn't really have Costco up in Niagara Falls. So, go ahead with your story.
Well, the last thing is just a quickie little update. For those that don't know, The Bear Season 4 is a little over a month away. So, I think it's June 25th is all episodes are dropping. And I'm just very kind of curious to see where the show goes. The original the poster for season 4 dropped, and we have a little bit of insight. I think some people have posted that like Chef Carmen might get a like chef rival in season 4. That's kind of like one of the only kind of like rumors that I've seen. We're a little bit TBD on what's officially going to kind of happen here. But, for folks that don't know, on my main YouTube channel, I do kind of like break down videos of The Bear, and I have 2 or 3 episodes shot for season 3 that I still need to kind of like edit together and get out, because season 3 I think got the least amount of praise from folks who love season 1, love season 2, and season 3 was like they got a little bit of stuff not wrong is what I'll say. I will go over it in those breakdown videos, but for those that are fans of the show, we're hoping for a pleasurable watching experience for season 4 of The Bear in just over a month.
Yeah, it's funny, I talked about this happening last week on the show, and I actually was like, I hope Justin doesn't yell at me because I'm still on season 2.
Oh, hey, for those that wouldn't get upset at you for missing season 3, it's you can watch it relatively. There's actually an episode I think you can totally skip. it like it narratively matters, but I think from a like for those of us that are just in it
Mm.
for the kitchen scenes, it is just kind of an interesting.
It's just funny because I loved the first season, and I just thought that was perfect. And I'm not saying they shouldn't have made more, but in my mind, if they didn't make more, I would have been totally fine because I just thought it encapsulated a restaurant so well. Um, it's fine, but I'm terrible with shows. My girlfriend gets mad at me all the time. Like we're watching The Pit right now, which is great, but like we're literally like a week an episode, or an episode a week because I'm just so bad at sitting down and watching a show. Like
I'm the same with Chef's Table Legends. I haven't seen any of them yet, and you covered on the first episode the Chef Keller episode. And I'm even
yeah,
like doing some research on a French Laundry episode that I'm trying to do for this show right now. So I'm like, it's on the list. It does become a time problem when we're like drowning in content all the time.
yeah, definitely. I will leave the podcast with maybe an ask and a sort of a political ask, I guess, and it shouldn't be political. So during COVID, I did a fundraising run for No Kid Hungry. It's an organization that helps feed kids that are hungry in the United States. And if you're not aware, there is a budget being proposed right now in our government, basically a spending bill where funds will go, where they won't go, where they'll be allocated. I believe that childhood hunger should be a bipartisan issue. So no, really, I don't know why it gets politicized, but that vote is coming up. And so I wanted to leave a link to contacting Congress through No Kid Hungry today. I just wanted to share a little bit of policy and advocacy from their website. So this is No Kid Hungry, 5 Ways SNAP Helps Kids. So recently, and this was published on February 19th, but they've been publishing a lot because this voting is going on right now. So recently, the U.S. House of Representatives unveiled a budget resolution that proposes a shocking $230 billion in cuts to USDA programs, threatening crucial anti-hunger initiatives like SNAP for Kids. As lawmakers continue to debate this proposal, the future of programs like SNAP, one of the nation's most effective tools in combating childhood hunger, hangs in the balance. Have experience with SNAP, so it is important for me. SNAP is vital for ensuring that children grow up healthy, educated, and equipped with the resources they need to break the cycle of poverty. But with these proposed cuts, millions of kids could lose access to the very support that helps them thrive. Today, 1 in 5 kids in the U.S. faces hunger. More than 17 million of those children are supported by the food they get through SNAP, and that is run by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. That not only affects kids, but it affects farmers and whatnot. So real quick, 5 ways SNAP helps kids. So 40% of all people who participate in SNAP are children. SNAP helps families most vulnerable to hunger. So 4 out of every 5 households on SNAP have a child under the age of 18, a senior over the age of 60, or an individual with a disability. These households make up 88% of all SNAP participants. They do have a note here that SNAP could end poverty. SNAP kept nearly 8 million people above the poverty line prior to the pandemic. And then SNAP affects a child's education. Research shows that kids who receive SNAP benefits do better in school, even increasing the likelihood of graduation. And obviously, lastly, SNAP affects a child's health. So research shows that kids receiving SNAP benefits are healthier than those who don't have access to SNAP, and their families are less likely to sacrifice health care to pay for other basic necessities. So just a CTA, I will leave a link in the show notes on where you can contact through No Kid Hungry. I think it's really important. Like I said, childhood hunger should be a bipartisan issue that is solved. And it is a little concerning, truly concerning and angering that these cuts could happen. So just a CTA on my end. I don't know if you have any thoughts, but
No. I have family members who participate in SNAP. Having a kid now, being a dad, and thinking about him going to school and not having food is like. It's like a gut-wrenching thing when you're actually looking your own kid in the face, and it's like having that as a reality. So just kudos to you for drawing attention to this. And like you said, it'll be in the show notes for folks to take action.
Yeah, I helped out No Kid Hungry during COVID, and then recently I'm trying to blank on the name. With my jiu-jitsu school, we just went and helped an organization that basically packages dried food to be shipped overseas. And when you start to see the work that goes into it, but then also the relative amount of work it takes to the large and vast amount of people that deal with hunger on a daily basis, it's pretty defeating. So but it's also, hopeful that people do this, and it's a great pride in myself for wanting, for helping in these situations. Like I said, I've had experience with SNAP. I've had experience with food being handed out to me when needed. So, it's just something that I find really important. And hopefully not too much damage happens, but we'll see.
Thanks for being here, Ray. Thanks for all the work that you do. And for those that are listening, if you want to share this episode with a friend who might get value from this, we'd really, really appreciate that. That's one of the number one ways that shows like ours grow. And also, if you haven't left a review on Apple, on Spotify, on Overcast, wherever you happen to listen, please do so, because that's another way that we can make sure that this episode gets to more folks that are like-minded and enjoy these types of industry news pieces.
Sure. And I'll try to catch up on the Bears, so don't be too mad at me. I got some time before I can get there, so.
Yeah, you're good. That's the show.
Awesome.